Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk a little bit about the firmament and what I believe the firmament represents. And this actually has no bearing on the shape of the earth. That's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk more about the number 17 and why I believe that's a very important number. And I believe it's important in terms of the firmament and what's going to take place with the firmament. That's what I want to talk about. And like I said, it doesn't have any bearing with the shape of the earth as much as it does with the geography of the earth. And so this is what I really wanted to talk about, because there was a reason why I pulled up this image in my last video. There was a lot more that I wanted to talk about, and the video was about the mysterious line that was detected in the earth by Google as well as the ISS. There was some sort of line that was appearing. The Google image may have been a digital glitch, but there was also an image that was taken from the ISS where the atmosphere seemed to show a clear line in the atmosphere. So I had done a video about that, and like I said, there was a lot more that I wanted to share about that, and it was because a thought had occurred to me some time ago, several months ago, when I did a video about Acts 27. I actually did several videos about Acts 27, and I explained how I believe God is describing the consummation of the covenant with the events that took place. But what I also noticed is that not only is God describing it in the context of what took place, but I believe he's also illustrating it with the geography of the earth. And so the thought occurred to me that if God is illustrating the true covenant, the consummation of the covenant in the geography of the earth with Acts 27, then it could be that God is also illustrating the false covenant. And of course, Mystery Babylon is believed to be the U.S. And so the thought just occurred to me that there's another peninsula in the earth that actually looks like a peninsula. And of course, I'm using the word peninsula euphemistically, but if you look at the geography of the earth, I think there's only two locations that really clearly look like a peninsula. I think there's others that I want to talk about, because there's another very important peninsula that it is involved in this as well, and this all has to do with the number 17, which is what I want to show you. But I think the most important peninsula is the Sinai Peninsula, which would be right here. And I've talked about before how the Red Sea looks like a DNA strand. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the Sinai Peninsula. This is an image of the Red Sea, and then of course the Sinai Peninsula would be right here. And so it actually parts the Red Sea. Of course, the crossing took place somewhere on this side, I believe, when Moses crossed the Red Sea. But I've explained before how the word red in the Hebrew actually refers to reeds. So it's actually the Sea of Reeds. And I've talked before about how I believe the reed represents a DNA strand. Okay, and I'll just show you that real quick. You can see the term Red Sea over here. And if you look at the word red, you see that it's referring to reeds, Sea of Rushes. So it has to do with reeds. And then I've talked about how and it's interesting, the very first use of this word is Exodus 23. So that's a number having to do with DNA. But I've talked about how I believe the reed represents a DNA strand. And I've explained before how I believe the Red Sea looks like a DNA strand when it's splitting apart, and it creates the replication fork during replication. So that's exactly what a DNA strand would look like as it begins to split while it's replicating. Okay, I want to go ahead and talk about the number 17 and why it's important with the Sinai Peninsula, because it was at Mount Sinai where God made a covenant, and another name for Mount Sinai is Horeb. You can see that in Deuteronomy 5:2. It says the Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. And as you can see, there's 17 matches for the word Horeb. And as you can see, it means desert, and it's another name for Mount Sinai, from which God gave the law to Moses and the Israelites. And as you can see, Strong's number 2722, which again, 22 is a number having to do with DNA. And I've talked about how I believe 27 is another number that represents the year 2017. And it comes from another word, which is actually 2717. So I believe both of those numbers represent the year 2017. And as you can see, it means to make desolate. And I've talked about before how Mount Zion is a desolate place. And so I'll just show you the one that comes up in Isaiah 66, verse 8. So it's interesting that it comes up in verse 8. And we're coming up on the Hebrew year 5778. But if you look at the word Zion, you can see that it means a dry or parched place, which is the same thing that the word Horeb means. And it was in Exodus 17, 1 through 7, so you have 17:17, where water came out of the rock. And so I'll just read that passage. This is the NIV. That was just the first one that came up. And it says, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt and make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? And Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go, and I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? And so it's in Exodus 17 where Moses struck the rock and water came out of the rock. And I've talked about before how Mount Horeb represents God, because Jesus is the rock. He's the rock of our salvation. But I've also explained how it also represents the bride. And this is an image of Mount Horeb as it looks today. You can see that right there. It's located at Mount Sinai. It's the same general location at the Sinai Peninsula. And so this is Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. They're both referring to the same thing. And I've talked about how Mount Horeb also represents the bride, just as Mount Zion represents God. It's the mountain of God. But Mount Zion is also the bride, and Mount Zion gives birth to the bride. Okay, so I just wanted to show you how this is all connected to the number 17, how Mount Horeb is connected to the number 17, and this is the covenant that God made, and the Strong's number is connected to the number 17. Okay, you can see that over here. It comes from the Strong's number 2717, but the first Strong's number that comes up is the 2722, which I believe has to do with DNA and the year 2017 as well. And as you can see, there's 17 matches. Okay, so now I want to get back to the geography of the Earth, but like I said, I wasn't going to say anything about Florida. The thought had just occurred to me that that also looks like a peninsula, and the reason I had pulled up the eastern and western hemispheres is because I was thinking that, you know, this would represent Rome, so why would God use something that represents Rome as the consummation of the covenant? But then I realized that if you divide the earth in half, this would be on the east, and of course Jesus comes from the east, and the Antichrist is believed to come from the west, and so that's why I had pulled up these images originally, but again, I wasn't going to mention anything about it. But then we had this Valentine's Day massacre, and I just bookmarked this video over here some time ago because I was going to try to make a video about this. And to be honest, at first I didn't even realize that this took place on Valentine's Day, but just when I saw the image of Florida when they were talking about it, the thought had occurred to me again about the imagery, and then I noticed it was connected with the number 17. Of course, there were 17 people dead, and then I saw this video that this was made by Steve Fletcher, but he's mirroring another video over here in this part where someone is talking about how this was all predicted in iPad Goat, and you can see the state of Florida over here on the map. And so I thought it was interesting, the connection with Valentine's Day. And then we also had this Google Doodle that happened on February 14th as well, which I had mentioned in my video about the Obama portrait. At the very end of that video, I mentioned how this Google Doodle actually looks like, I had said some type of beast, but then I realized right after I made the video that it actually looks like a serpent, that the heart actually looks like a serpent head, and then you have the two fangs over here. And so this was recently confirmed in this video over here by Jonathan Kleck, where he noticed that this imagery behind Obama, the dark outline over here, actually forms a serpent head. And again, this looks like a heart shape, and you have the two eyes over here. And then he also noticed, he said his friend Chris noticed that this sperm actually forms a fang as well. And so this all confirms to me that this is all about DNA, and it's all about the true covenant that's going to be consummated by God, which I believe is depicted in Acts 27 as well as in Zechariah 14 with the Mount of Olives that I've talked about before. I believe it's also confirmed in the book of Ruth, which I may try to talk about next, but I believe this represents the true covenant and how God is going to consummate the covenant. And then the thought had occurred to me about Florida and the fact that this was like just in the open sea, because this looks like a womb over here, so it looks like the traditional type of the consummation, whereas the Antichrist system will be through the mark of the beast, which again I believe that's confirmed with the video by Jonathan Kleck, where the fang is depicted as a sperm, because I believe it will be the mark of the beast that will be the consummation of that covenant. And so I have a lot more that I want to share, but I'm just about out of time, so I'll have to continue with more in the next video. Thanks for watching. God bless.